The winter evening had settled over Bayford like a heavy blanket of silence. The streets were almost empty except for the last few pedestrians hurrying home through the narrow sidewalks, wrapping their coats tighter as a cold wind swept through the city. The older parts of Bayford had always felt eerie after dark, and the Hillcrest Hotel was no exception. Built in the late 1960s, it stood tall with its faded brick walls, dim yellow lighting, and a tired lobby that had seen more days of glory than anyone wanted to admit. It was in this old, quiet building that 32-year-old David Hale arrived at 9:45 p.m. David was a software technician who worked long hours and traveled often for his job. Hillcrest was his usual stop whenever he had a conference or office meeting in this area of town. It was not fancy, but it was affordable, familiar, and close to where he needed to be. He had never once experienced anything strange there. To him, it was just another hotel, another keycard, another bed for the night. At check-in, the clerk greeted him with a tired smile. The hotel wasn't busy. Only a few guests had signed in that evening. David filled in his details, collected his electronic room key, and headed toward the elevator. He was assigned room 407 on the 4th floor, the same room he had stayed in multiple times in the past. Nothing unusual. Nothing to worry about. Room 407 looked exactly how he remembered it. Simple, neat, and slightly outdated. The wallpaper had small patterns of faded flowers, the carpet was maroon, and a wooden desk sat beneath a framed painting of Bayford's old harbor. David dropped his luggage at the foot of the bed, loosened his tie, and let out a long sigh. It had been a stressful day filled with endless meetings, technical discussions, and last-minute changes that had kept him tired and tense. He took a hot shower, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the bed with his laptop. He planned to finish some work before going to sleep, but after only 15 minutes, fatigue began to fog his thoughts. His eyelids felt heavy. His head nodded forward a few times before he closed his laptop, stretched, and decided to get a drink from the vending machine outside. He slipped on his shoes, grabbed a dollar bill, and stepped out of his room. The hallway was silent. Soft, humming fluorescent lights lit the narrow corridor. The old carpet muffled his footsteps as he walked past the rows of rooms. He didn't think about anything unusual, just a quick drink and then back to bed. He walked down the hallway, turned the corner where a vending machine stood, and bought a can of soda. The machine rattled and clanked before delivering the metal can into the slot. He picked it up, cold to the touch, and headed back. It was then that something shifted. As he walked back into the hallway leading toward room 407, he suddenly felt something strange, an unexplainable sense of tension in the air. It was like stepping into a room that someone had just argued in. You couldn't hear or see anything, but you could feel the energy hanging there like smoke. David paused, confused. He shook it off and continued walking. He had no reason to be afraid. He reached room 407 and slid his key card into the lock. The light flashed green, and he pushed the door open with one hand while holding the cold soda can in the other. The moment he stepped inside, the world seemed to stop. The air in the room felt colder, almost freezing. David blinked once, then twice, not trusting his own eyes. There, lying on the carpet in the center of the room, was a woman. She appeared to be in her late 20s or early 30s. Her long dark hair covered half her face, and a deep crimson pool surrounded her head. Her green dress was torn at the shoulder, and one of her hands was stretched out on the floor, as if she had been trying desperately to reach something or someone in her final moments. David's stomach twisted. His heart slammed violently against his ribcage. The soda can slipped from his fingers and crashed to the floor, rolling to the side, hissing slightly as it leaked. His mouth went dry, and a shiver ran through him from head to toe. He couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely breathe. There was no mistaking what he was seeing. This wasn't a dream, a hallucination, or something imagined. It was real. A dead woman, brutally murdered, lying right in front of him. Finally, David snapped out of his frozen state and lunged backward, nearly tripping as he stumbled into the hallway. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed the front desk. His voice was frantic, trembling, barely forming complete sentences as he tried to explain what he'd just seen. Within moments, the hotel clerk and nighttime security guard rushed to the room. They expected panic. They expected something frightening. But when they opened the door and flashed their lights inside, everything was normal. Completely normal. The room was spotless. The carpet was clean. The furniture was untouched. The bed was neatly made. The walls were bare except for the same old painting. There was no body. No sign of a struggle. Not even the spilled soda he remembered dropping. David's eyes widened with horror. He stepped inside, staring at the exact spot where the woman had been moments ago. The shock flooded him again, but now mixed with confusion. Had the body been removed in seconds? Impossible. He had barely left the room for a minute, and no one passed him in the hallway. The elevators hadn't moved. The staircase landing was in full view. Where could the body have gone? The security guard watched David carefully, as though trying to measure whether he was lying. The hotel clerk tried to comfort him, explaining gently that he might have experienced stress, fatigue, or an overactive imagination after a long workday. They suggested he might have fallen asleep and dreamed it. But David wasn't convinced, not for a second. The fear in his eyes was not the fear of someone who imagined something. It was the fear of someone who had seen something real. Against his insistence, the hotel's small camera system was checked. The recording showed David walking to the vending machine alone and returning alone. No one had entered his room except him. There was no evidence of anyone else. With no proof, no blood, and no crime scene, the police saw no reason to investigate. There was nothing to report, nothing to examine, nothing to follow up on. To them, it was nothing more than a stressed traveler experiencing a late-night panic episode. But David knew what he saw. It was so vivid that he could still picture the woman's pale face, her vacant eyes, and the silent plea frozen on her lips. He tried to calm down, but his heart refused to settle. Something inside him whispered that he should leave the hotel and never come back. After signing out and collecting his belongings, David walked out into the cold Bayford night. As the automatic doors slid closed behind him and the hotel grew smaller in the distance, he still couldn't shake the image from his mind. It felt as if the woman was still lying there, inside room 407, waiting for someone to help her. He didn't know it then, but he would not be the last person to see her. And room 407 was only beginning to reveal its terrifying secret. 2 months passed after David Hale's terrifying experience in room 407. Life went on as if nothing had happened. The Hillcrest Hotel continued welcoming guests. The same front desk clerk rotated shifts, and no one brought up the strange event again. Most people believed David had been exhausted, maybe half asleep, maybe stressed from work, and that his mind had played tricks on him. Even David tried to move on, though he still woke up some nights sweating, remembering the woman he had seen on the floor. But the hotel had not heard the last of room 407. One chilly evening in early spring, Marianne Clark, a 41-year-old marketing executive, checked into the Hillcrest Hotel. She preferred quiet, budget-friendly places during business trips, and the Hillcrest seemed perfect. She had no idea the hotel had a shadowed history, or that she was being placed in the same room David had tried to forget. When the front desk clerk handed her the key card and said room 407, Marianne simply smiled, thanked him politely, and headed upstairs with her small suitcase. To her, a room number was just a number, nothing more. The fourth-floor hallway greeted her with the same old dim lights, the faded patterned carpet, and the faint scent of carpet cleaner left over from decades of hallway maintenance. She noticed how quiet the floor was. Not a single door opened or closed, no televisions, no voices, just silence and the soft buzz of electricity in the walls. Inside the room, everything looked normal. A small desk, a bed with neatly folded blankets, a nightstand with a lamp and tiny clock, and a framed painting of Bayford Harbor hanging crookedly on the wall. Marianne set her bag down, opened the window slightly to let in some fresh air, and then got ready for the next day's early meeting. She spent most of the evening reviewing her presentation slides, calling a coworker to finalize a few numbers, and then watching a little television before heading out for dinner. Marianne was confident and organized, a woman who rarely panicked, rarely imagined things, and almost never scared easily. She believed in facts, evidence, and logical explanations, which made what happened next even more shocking. Around 9 p.m., she walked 2 blocks to a nearby restaurant, ate dinner alone, and returned directly to the hotel just after 10. She exchanged a friendly nod with the receptionist, rode up to the 4th floor, and walked slowly toward her room. The hallway was still empty and quiet, exactly as she'd left it. She slid her key card into the lock, heard the beep, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, she froze. There, lying face down on the carpet, was a woman. Her dark hair was spread around her head. Her green dress was wrinkled and torn, and her arm was stretched forward as if she had been trying desperately to reach the door. A dark pool of blood had soaked into the floor beneath her head. The smell hit Marianne a second later, an iron scent she recognized instantly. Blood. Her heart jumped violently. Her breath caught in her throat, and she stumbled backward until her back hit the hallway wall. She gasped, staring wide-eyed through the doorway. She tried to force out words, but her voice refused to come. It was as if her vocal cords had frozen along with the rest of her body. For several seconds, she stood there motionless, unable to process the scene. Her rational mind screamed that she needed to call for help, but her instincts were fighting sheer shock. Finally, she snapped into action, turned, and ran down the hall as fast as her legs could carry her. When she reached the elevator, she burst into a panicked stream of words, shouting for someone to help her. The front desk clerk heard her and rushed toward the elevator area, alarmed and confused. Marianne, breathing heavily, grabbed the clerk's arm and pointed up the hallway. "There's a woman. There's a dead woman in my room," she gasped. The clerk felt her pulse quicken. Memories of David Hale shot into his mind. 2 months ago, another guest had said the same thing. Room 407. A woman on the floor. Blood. But that time, nothing had been there. Could the same thing be happening again? He didn't want to believe it, but he also couldn't ignore the fear in Marianne's eyes. She clearly wasn't making up a story for attention. She hadn't even known about the last incident. Something real had terrified her. He called security on the internal phone, and within moments, the same guard from David's case arrived. Together, they followed Marianne back to room 407. She stood behind them, arms wrapped around herself, shivering even though the hallway was warm. The guard pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nothing. The room was spotless. The carpet was clean. The bed untouched. The air calm and stale. Even the window Marianne had left open earlier was now closed, something she noticed immediately. She stared into the room, her shock shifting into confusion, then disbelief. No, this is wrong," she whispered. "She was right there. I saw her. I came in and she was lying right there on the floor. She was injured. There was blood. I'm not imagining what I saw." The clerk gently tried to calm her, but she snapped back. "I'm not lying. I know what I saw." The guard exchanged a long look with the clerk. They both remembered David's terrified face 2 months earlier. Same room. Same description. Same exact details. The woman in a green dress. The pool of blood. The outstretched hand. What were the chances 2 different guests would imagine the exact same scene? Marianne was shaking, not from fear of ghosts or shadows, but from shock at her own certainty. She had never experienced anything supernatural. She didn't believe in hauntings. She trusted her eyes, and she trusted logic. But logic was failing her tonight. The hotel staff felt they had no choice but to call the police again. Detectives arrived and questioned Marianne in the lobby. They took her statement carefully, noting the vivid details, the broken wine glass she had seen on the floor, the way the woman's fingers were bent slightly upward, and the smear of blood trailing toward the door. These details were far too specific to be a random hallucination, especially when they matched the description David had given almost perfectly. This time, instead of dismissing everything, one of the detectives decided to look deeper. He asked the hotel to pull the archived records, and after some searching, a dusty folder from 12 years ago was found in the old office storage room. Inside was the police report of a murder that had taken place in room 407. A young woman named Emily Carter, age 29, had been found dead in that room. Her body had been discovered lying face down on the carpet. She had been wearing a green dress. A shattered glass of wine had spilled near her hand. The carpet had been stained with dark blood, exactly where both witnesses claimed to have seen it years later. Emily's killer had never been caught. Detectives realized that whatever was happening inside room 407 wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't random, and it wasn't something the human mind could easily explain away. 2 people, complete strangers, had seen the same unsolved murder scene replayed in front of them, 12 years after it happened. The police knew that something inside room 407 was trapped in time, repeating a moment so horrific that it refused to fade. And the haunting had only just begun. Detective Laura Briggs had been on the force for 14 years and had seen just about everything. Cold cases resurrected by new evidence, crime scene staged to look accidental, criminals who lied without flinching, and families torn apart by unanswered questions. But this case, the one tied to room 407 at the Hillcrest Hotel, felt different from the start. It wasn't just the strange reports. It was the tone in the witnesses' voices, the terror in their eyes, and the fact that two unrelated people had described the exact same scene 12 years apart. Laura wasn't one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. She believed in evidence, logic, cause and effect. But she also understood something many detectives learned with time. Not everything could be dismissed just because it sounded strange. Sometimes, the truth began where logic ran out. And something in room 407 had crossed that line. She opened the old case file for Emily Carter, spread the faded documents across a desk, and began reading every detail the original investigators had recorded. Emily had been a young woman in her late 20s, working as a graphic designer. She had checked into the Hillcrest Hotel with her boyfriend, Thomas Reed, the night she died. According to the report, a maid discovered Emily's body early the next morning after housekeeping knocked several times with no answer. Her body was found lying face down on the carpet. Her green dress was torn at the shoulder. Blood had pooled beneath her head. A shattered wine glass was beside her hand. The police had arrived within minutes, but by then, Thomas had disappeared without a trace. He became the prime suspect, but with no solid leads and no sign of him anywhere, the case eventually went cold. Laura leaned back in her chair and stared at Emily's smiling photo, taken just months before her death. Something about the expression struck her. It was bright, hopeful, unaware of the tragedy ahead. Laura flipped through the older interview transcripts and noticed Emily's sister had told detectives that Emily had been planning to leave Thomas due to his gambling habits and violent anger. The original detectives had noted it but didn't have enough evidence to treat it as motive. Back then, there were no security cameras in the hallways, no digital records, and no DNA standards as advanced as today. The investigation had reached a dead end. But now, 12 years later, room 407 was showing something that no detective could ignore. Two witnesses, David Hale and Mary Ann Clark, had reported the exact same scene down to the smallest details. Both entered the room, both saw Emily's body, and both described the same position, the same clothing, and the same broken wine glass. And when they alerted others, the room instantly reverted to normal. That couldn't be a coincidence. Laura decided she needed to see room 407 for herself. She arrived at the Hillcrest Hotel late in the afternoon, her badge hanging around her neck and her notebook tucked in her jacket pocket. The front desk clerk's face stiffened when he recognized her. "You're here about the room?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I need access, and I'd like to talk to anyone who was working the night of the two recent sightings." The clerk swallowed nervously and led her to the security office, where she interviewed staff who had been present during both incidents. Their stories aligned. Both guests had run out terrified, convinced they had just witnessed a murder. The security guard mentioned something that caught Laura's attention. Both guests had described something that matched the original crime exactly, even though those details had never been released to the public. That made the case more serious. After talking to the staff, Laura took her recording equipment and climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. As she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoed quietly. The air was still, too still for a hotel with guests staying in nearby rooms. Her hand hovered nervously near her gun, not because she expected danger, but because she felt the eerie silence pressing around her. She paused at the door. Room 407. An ordinary room number on a brass plate. No sign, no warning, nothing to suggest the horrors witnesses had described. She slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room looked plain and quiet. A bed with a stiff blanket, a nightstand, a small desk, a window facing the neighboring building, a television mounted to the wall. No blood, no body, no sign of violence. But Laura wasn't satisfied. She set down her equipment, an audio recorder, temperature gauge, digital camera, and a small electromagnetic sensor. These tools weren't standard police gear, but detectives occasionally used them when investigating environmental explanations, gas leaks, temperature fluctuations, sensory triggers, anything that might make a witness experience hallucinations or panic. If there was something physical in the room that caused two people to experience the same vision, her equipment might detect it. She sat on the desk chair and began reading through Emily Carter's autopsy report, highlighting details and taking notes. The cause of death had been blunt force trauma to the skull. No defensive wounds were recorded on Emily's hands, which suggested she might have been struck by someone she trusted, or she had been taken by surprise. The angle of impact indicated she had been knocked backward before hitting the floor. Laura frowned. If Emily had been conscious for even a few moments after the blow, she might have tried to crawl toward the door. That would explain why her body was found stretched out, as if she was reaching for help. Hours passed. The room remained silent. Laura checked the time repeatedly as her eyes drooped with exhaustion. She decided to lie down on the bed for a moment, telling herself she'd just rest her eyes. She did not sleep long. At 3:17 a.m., her temperature sensor beeped. She snapped awake, instantly alert. The air had dropped several degrees in less than a minute. She sat up slowly, heart pounding, and looked around. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, no sound. Then the electromagnetic device began to spike wildly. Laura stood, taking careful steps toward the center of the room. The hair on her arm stood up. There was no wind, yet it felt as though something invisible brushed past her shoulder. And then she heard it. A voice. A woman's voice. Soft, weak, desperate. "Help me." Laura froze. She wasn't easily frightened, but the voice cut through her like ice. She turned, expecting to see someone standing behind her. No one was there. She forced herself to speak, her voice steady but cautious. "Emily, is that you?" Silence. She took another step forward, and the room grew even colder. Her breath appeared in front of her face, white fog blooming in the air. She felt something else too, a wave of grief so heavy she almost had to sit down. It was as though someone else's emotions were pushed into her mind. Fear, pain, regret. Laura realized this wasn't a random haunting. Someone was reliving a moment, not because they wanted to, but because they were trapped in it. After several tense minutes, the temperature slowly returned to normal. The emotional weight lifted. The equipment readings settled. Everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Laura stood alone in the silent room, breathing hard, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't sure what she believed, but she knew what she experienced. Something traumatic had remained in room 407, playing on a loop like a memory burned into the walls. Laura packed her equipment, locked the door behind her, and walked slowly down the hallway. She now understood one thing with absolute clarity. Emily Carter's last moments had never been heard. And until someone listened, room 407 was not going to let the past rest. Detective Harris sat alone in his office long after midnight, the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights the only sound breaking the silence. He stared at the photographs spread across his desk, crime scene images, hotel reports, witness statements, and repeated photographs of Samuel Reed, the man who started everything. Harris rubbed his tired eyes. Something wasn't right. Too much connected, too much aligned perfectly, and yet none of it made sense in the real world. He leaned back and exhaled slowly, wondering if he was getting too close or simply losing his grip. Just then, Officer Delgado knocked softly on the door and peeked inside. Harris waved him in. Delgado looked nervous, which immediately caught Harris' attention. He placed a large folder on the desk. "You need to see this," Delgado said. Harris opened the folder, expecting another report or a basic document. Instead, he froze. Inside was a faded black-and-white photograph of the same hotel room, taken in 1964. The bloodstain on the carpet, the discarded knife, the broken lamp, even the angle of the shot. It was identical to the crime scene Harris had walked into only hours before. Harris flipped the photo over. Someone had written a date, name, and time in neat handwriting. June 4th, 1964. Samuel Reed. Harris' stomach tightened. "How can the exact same crime scene exist 60 years apart?" he whispered. Delgado sat down, looking pale. "That's the strange part, sir. There are more." They spread the photographs out on the desk. 1952, 1979, 1991, 2006. Different decades, different victims, same room, same scene, same chaos. The only thing that changed were the names of the victims. Every time, the police arrived. Every time, evidence was collected. And every time, the suspect was listed as Samuel Reed. And every time, the man disappeared before trial. Harris stared blankly at the pattern forming in front of him, a cold realization creeping over him. This was no longer a missing person case. It wasn't even just a murder case. It was a repeating event, fixed in time like a scratched record that always played the same note. "Get me everything we have on Reed," Harris ordered. Delgado nodded and rushed out of the room. Harris spent the next hour examining every file connected to Samuel Reed. His criminal record was bizarre: arrests for murder every few decades, but not a single conviction. Reed always disappeared. Sometimes witnesses saw him flee. Other times he was reported captured at the station, only to vanish from locked cells. And each disappearance was followed by a statement from the officer in charge claiming the suspect had simply walked out. Walked out of locked rooms. Walked out of cuffs. Walked out of history. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. He opened the earliest record, a handwritten police report from 1921 with yellowing edges. The case details were eerily familiar. A woman murdered in room 313 of the Briarstone Hotel, the body found staged in the exact same way Harris had seen hours before. The suspect, again, was listed as Samuel Reed. He turned the page and stopped. A grainy mugshot of Reed stared back at him. Harris looked closely at the face. The features were sharp, dark eyes, high cheekbones, slightly curled hair. It looked like the same man they had recorded on camera this year, only younger. Harris shook his head. It wasn't possible. He pulled another mugshot from decades later, 1952. The features were identical. No aging. No difference. Unless... No, Harris muttered. There has to be another explanation. But logic was starting to slip. A sharp knock on the door snapped him back. It was Delgado again, holding a dusty, leather-bound book. He set it in front of Harris. "This was found in the hotel basement while searching the property records," Delgado said. "You should read the inside cover." Harris opened the book and read aloud. "Briarstone Hotel, Guest Registry, 1919 to 1930. He flipped to the section for 1921 and found the name immediately. Samuel Reed, room 313, June 3rd to June 5th. But Reed's signature wasn't alone. Right below it was another entry written in the same handwriting. Scheduled. No first name, no last name, no date or price. Just a single word. Harris frowned. Scheduled for what? Delgado swallowed hard. The murders always happen on the second day of his stay. Every single time. Harris stared at Reed's signature again, feeling a growing pressure behind his ribs. His brain wanted to categorize this as coincidence, but the evidence kept arguing against reality. "Maybe we're looking at a family line," Harris suggested weakly. "Like generations of killers using the same name." Delgado shook his head. "We thought of that. DNA samples from cases decades apart match exactly. No mutations. No generational drift. It's the same man." Harris gripped the table. Dead quiet filled the room. "So we're hunting someone who hasn't aged in over 100 years. Delgado didn't answer, but silence was answer enough. Harris stood and grabbed his coat. "We're going back to the hotel," he said firmly. "If this keeps happening, then something is triggering it. A person, a date, something inside that room." Delgado followed hesitantly. When they arrived, the hotel was dimly lit, and the hallways were quiet. The staff had been cleared out, leaving the corridors lifeless. The elevator dinged weakly as they reached the third floor. The carpet muffled their steps as they approached room 313, its door sealed with crime scene tape. Harris hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of every unsolved decade pressing on his back. Then he tore the tape aside and pushed the door open. The crime scene inside was untouched. Blood spilled across the carpet, furniture overturned, glass shattered across the floor. Nothing had changed in the last few hours. But now that Harris understood the cycle, the room felt different. It felt old, tired, and full of something watching. Delgado walked toward the desk where a framed photograph sat today. Harris hadn't noticed it earlier. Delgado picked it up and froze. "Harris, you need to see this." Harris stepped closer and stared at the picture. It showed the hotel grand opening in 1920. The staff stood smiling in front of the entrance. And there, in the center of the front row, wearing a suit and bow tie, was Samuel Reed. His name was typed below the image. Assistant Manager, Samuel Reed. Harris's blood ran cold. "He worked here," Delgado whispered. "No," Harris corrected quietly. He never left. Harris walked toward the mirror above the dresser. Something about it felt off. The frame was rusted, and the glass was slightly warped, as though aged beyond its years. Harris leaned in, studying it carefully. Then he saw something that made his breath stop. The reflection behind him, the room, was clean. The blood, the broken lamp, the torn blanket, none of it appeared in the glass. The room and the reflection looked neat and untouched, as though frozen in 1920. But the worst part wasn't the clean room behind him. It was the figure standing in the reflection, just behind his left shoulder. A man in an old-fashioned hotel uniform. Samuel Reed. Before Harris could turn, the mirror flickered like a television losing signal. Delgado grabbed Harris' arm. "We need to leave. Now." Harris kept staring at the glass. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Reed wasn't just repeating a crime. He was trapped inside it. And now Harris was in the loop too. Detective Harris didn't remember how he got from room 313 to his car. The last clear memory was staring into the mirror and seeing Samuel Reed standing behind him. Silent, expressionless, and as real as the blood on the hotel carpet. Harris had drawn his weapon on instinct, but when he turned around, Reed wasn't there. The room was empty. The reflection was lying, or perhaps the real world was. Now Harris sat parked outside the Briarstone Hotel, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Delgado sat beside him, equally shaken, staring straight ahead. After several long seconds, Delgado spoke first. "Do we report this?" Harris exhaled slowly. "And say what?" "That a suspect who hasn't aged in 100 years appeared in a mirror." Delgado didn't argue. They both knew no one at the precinct would believe them. Weiss, they'd label it a stress-induced hallucination and pull them off the case. Harris had spent his career fighting criminals and corruption, but never supernatural impossibility. Still, he wasn't ready to accept a ghost story without a fight. "We go back to the beginning," Harris said. "If Reed is stuck in time, we need to understand what started the loop." Delgado nodded and placed a stack of documents on the seat between them. "I grabbed everything connected to the Briarstone before we left." Harris began sorting through the pages: construction permits, staff rosters, guest registries, and legal complaints dating back over a century. Most of it was standard paperwork, until they found a file that instantly stood out. Briarstone Grand Opening, June 4th, 1920. Harris flipped open the thin file, expecting to see a celebratory launch. Instead, the first page contained a short, hastily typed statement. Half the ink faded with time. Incident in room 313. Guest Helen Ward found deceased. Suspect, Samuel Reed, assistant manager. Stunned, Harris leaned back. So the very first murder happened on opening night. Delgado nodded grimly. Before the hotel was even open to the public. Harris continued reading. The text noted that Reed was detained but escaped less than 12 hours later. Eyewitness accounts described something strange. Reed walking out of his cell despite being padlocked behind bars. Police thought witnesses were drunk or confused. Reed vanished into thin air. From that moment forward, every few decades, the murder in room 313 reappeared. Same room, same staging, same items knocked over, same weapon, same suspect. But there was no explanation about Reed himself. No background. No next of kin. His personnel file listed only. Name, Samuel Reed. Address, Briarstone Hotel. Status, live-in employee. As far as history was concerned, Reed lived in the hotel and nowhere else. Harris rubbed his forehead. Why would a hotel room trap the same murder forever? Delgado shook his head. Maybe Reed wanted to escape justice and got stuck in the process. Oh, Harris said slowly. Maybe he's not the one trapped. Maybe the room is. It sounded ridiculous, but so did everything else about the case. They drove back to the precinct. The building was quiet, most officers gone for the night. Harris unlocked the evidence room and placed the old documents onto the central case table. The harsh overhead lights made the pages look even older, ghost-like in their faded ink and yellowed edges. Delgado returned a few minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and dropped into the seat across from him. They both stared at the board they had built over the past hours: dates, photographs, mugshots, written statements, and pinned diagrams connecting each case. A timeline ran from 1920 to the present, with red strings linking each identical crime scene. At the very top of the board, in the center, was Reed's photograph from 1920. He stared back at them from a century ago with the same expression he wore now. Delgado spoke softly. "We need to re-examine the original victim." Harris nodded and sifted through the earliest files. The first murder victim, Helen Ward, had almost no information attached to her case. No next of kin, no background sheet, no confirmed address. The police of 1920 had barely investigated the victim before focusing entirely on Reed. The only useful detail came from a short witness statement written in smudged fountain pen.